asked you to close your eyes just for a second, not if you're driving, and hold your breath. Imagine running through a hot, dark night, through an unfamiliar land, while explosive gas shells are being thrown directly at you. All the while, you're loaded with heavy equipment, ammunition around your belts, your shoulders, your arms. Well, this is what thousands of very brave Australian men endured exactly 100 years ago now as they approached enemy lines at Hill 60. They were marching through the hills, preparing for the Battle of the Messines, an offensive plan to begin today to force the Germans to withdraw from their main battle lines. But at 11 p.m. on June the 6th, just as the 3rd Australian Division of the Australian Imperial Force were approaching above ground, they were subjected to gas attacks. Now, despite this, these soldiers were determined to reach enemy lines on June 7 because it had all been planned, and they continued to march through this shield of gas. And in the early hours of the morning, 19 underground mines were detonated, which we discussed last week on the program, officially launching the battle. Eventually, the battle became an example of tactical success. In fact, it was the most successful battle up until that point in the First World War. To tell us more, Will Davies is on the line right now. Will, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chris. How are you?
I'm very, very well. By 1917, what had the situation on the Western Front near Ypres?
Look, mate, it started off fairly badly for the Australians. They'd been massacred at Bullecourt in two terrible battles, and that was in April and May. So here we are in June, and they're coming into the line as the 3rd Australian Division, brand new, under General Monash, hadn't been in battle before. So they had a lot to prove, and they're the guys that were caught in Plug Street Wood that you mentioned in that terrible gas attack. So they're coming up to form up their line, ready for the attack, and the Germans don't, I think, particularly know they're there. They just bombing and shelling the support areas, the lead-up areas for an attack. They knew the attack was coming, so they're just shelling Plug Street Wood, which is still there today. You can go in, and within Plug Street Wood confines is the only all-Australian cemetery, Toronto Cemetery, but these guys did suffer very badly. They were, as you say, keen to get to the line, so they kept moving, and they got up with all their load, with this terrible gas, and they formed up ready for the attack at 3:10 a.m. when the mines went off. Now, they weren't up at Hill 60. They were actually at the very southern end of the line by Messines village.
Now, being at the southern end of the line by Messines village, they knew that these mines were going off, or was it kept secret from them?
No, they were told, I think they were told really just before they went, because these are seriously big mines, you know.
Yeah.
And in the case of where the New Zealanders and the Australians attacked, one of the mines, because of the convoluting line, actually went off to their left, you know, so they're not immediately ahead of them, but these mines went bang, bang, bang up the line, and so by the time they reached the German front line, which had been pounded, you know, incessantly from about the 20th of May, you know, we're talking about guns wheel on wheel. You know, we're talking about 3,000 guns lined up to just fire on this 17 or 14-kilometre front, whatever it was.
Did they have any expectation of the fact that gas would be used?
Well, they always anticipated gas, but gas wasn't just gas. It was a combination of different types of gas. Mustard gas hadn't come in at this point. But what they'd put in was an irritant, like a tear gas, an itching gas, something that had forced men to take off their gas mask. And then they'd, of course, mix in with that gas, you know, phosgene and other poisonous gases that really, you know, was the killer.
Yeah. But they marched on. They weren't turning around because of a gas attack.
No, a lot of men fell out, of course. You know, suddenly you've got 500 casualties out of your moving battalion, and then they formed up. So at 3 3:10, the Australians started their attack at the very southern end of the line. Now, just to their left was the New Zealand division, and this was the first time since Gallipoli the Australians and the New Zealanders had fought together, and they were the ones that actually went up through Messines village. One chap, Fickleton, won a Victoria Cross in that attack. They took the village, and then they waited, and following Australians then took up the advance, what they did a leapfrogging move, went through the New Zealanders, and then pushed on to attack further on.
Right. And it was regarded as a successful strategy.
It was very successful, mate. They did lose. By the end of the campaign, a week or so later, the Allied casualties were about 25,000. The German casualties were pretty much the same.
Wow.
But they'd advanced the line 3 or 4 kilometres, which in those days is just unheard of. They just, if you get 100 yards, you've gone a long way. So they pushed the Germans, but most importantly, they broke that. They cracked the ridge line, which allowed them to get over that impossible, impregnable ridge line, this sickle-shaped ridge that ran up to Passchendaele, and they could then start pushing on the Menin Road. They could then push on to Passchendaele during October, September, that later in the year, and finally Passchendaele fell in early November to the Canadians.
So right this second, 100 years ago, it's deafening noise, it's unbelievably inhospitable conditions.
For the Germans particularly.
Right. And then the gas in the air.
Gas in the air.
The screams of soldiers being taken out of the line.
Oh, the carnage. I mean, what happened, the British on the left of the Australian line weren't in position. So instead of us beginning our attack at 1 p.m, once we got over the ridge line, we're now on the face where the Germans can physically see us. The British hadn't moved up. We had to stall our attack for 2 hours. We're sitting exposed on the eastern slope of the Messines Ridge, and the Germans were able then to shell that open, exposed area, and we took terrible casualties just sitting there waiting to move on.
Yeah. You're going back to the Western Front next month. Will you be going anywhere near this area?
Oh yeah, I go to Messines Ridge. I go to the craters that remain, and of the 19 craters, I think every one of them still remains. So you can visit these circular ponds. You'd never know what they were unless they were pointed out. They're just literally very concentric circular ponds.
Yeah.
And the country really hasn't changed. And one of the great things when I wrote the follow-up book to Somme Mud was that I found a big, heavy, thick German blockhouse, which is where young Private Lynch of the 45th Battalion was wounded. And, pushing my way through a sort of 6-7 foot of corn, I came out of the other side and there's this blockhouse, and I could not believe it on the line where young Lynch was wounded. But
and of course you got that from what he described in his diary notes.
Yeah. And from where the battalion was, I knew, Oxygen Trench and Owl Trench where the lines were.
What a discovery!
So I go back, mate. And friends come with me. Anyone. I'm going back in late July. I'm doing a Western Front 5-day tour, and then taking a few mates to Normandy for a couple of days. So. Yeah.
Good on you. Thank you for telling us about today 100 years ago, and it's worth people just considering what crazy, bloody conditions our men were facing.
The one thing that's quite profound, I don't know where or if in the media, it's like the Battle of Bullecourt. These terrible days are just forgotten. What happened to lest we forget?
Yeah. We've got to follow it through, which is what we're trying to do here.
Thanks, mate.
Good on you, Will. Much appreciated.
You're a beauty.
Okay, military.